As you know, when you use the activity method start activity for result to launch an intent, the onActivity result method, which you see here, will be called to receive a response back from the activity that was launched. And as you also know, this method receives three parameters. The first one is the request code that was used in launching the other activity. The second one is the result code indicating whether or not that activity was successful. And then the third argument is an intent that may or may not contain additional data associated with the response back to your activity. Now that intent is particularly important in speech recognition because embedded within that intent is the set of possible spoken matches that the user spoke to the app. So we're going to take advantage of that in the logic code of this method. Now the method is quite large because it embeds all of the logic of ordering the pizza into one long method definition. However, there are some key pieces that I want to point out and focus on here. First of all, at line 293, you can see that if the request code is equal to 0 and the result code is equal to result OK, then we're going to have a bunch of logic that we apply. This is the case where the speech recognition engine was successfully able to understand something that the user said and to create an array list of possible matches to what the user said and submit them back to my pizza activity. And now we need to do our own logic handling to check and see if whatever the user said matches up with the responses we were expecting. Now, if this condition is false, we're going to go all the way down to the bottom of this method, and you can see it's quite long. And instead, we're going to get to this else if, which is going to basically allow the user to quit if in fact there was some problem that resulted in the speech not being recognized. And of course, when the user is allowed to quit, they may choose not to quit, in which case they'll go back and continue with the ordering process. Now, let's go back up to the top of this method once again. And this is a key piece here at lines 296 through 298. You can see we're using the data intent, the third parameter, to get the string array list extra. String array list extra is an array list of strings that contains the possible matches to whatever the user spoke. And we're storing that in a local variable called possible matches. And you can see the argument to the get string array list extra is recognizer intent dot extra results, and these are results that are being passed back to the calling activity, in our case the pizza activity. Now once we have that array list, we have to now figure out if it contains a response that was expected given the current state of the app. And the first thing we do is we get our string array of valid responses set up because we're going to need to compare the items in that array list to the items in our valid responses array. Now if we're not in the middle of quitting, then the valid responses array is assigned choices sub current message index, which is an array of possible choices based on the current state of the app. And otherwise we set it to the array binary choices, which contains the strings yes and no. If valid responses is equal to null at this point, we can't compare to anything, so we simply would return from the onActivity result method. Now, once we get past this point, the next key piece is here at lines 314 through 327, and basically we're now looping through the possible matches that were returned from the speech recognizer, and we're comparing them to our valid responses, and if we find a valid response, we'll assign it to our result variable and get out of this nested loop. At line 329, if result is equal to null, that would mean there were no matches, and therefore we'll play an error message to ask the user to repeat the response, and then we will listen for that response once again. Now, if by any chance there is a quit in progress, then we have a bunch of logic here that figures out what messages to speak to the user, whether it be the quit message or whether we want to reset the app and take a new order depending on the current state of the app. We also have the ability to start listening for a response from the user depending on the state of the app as well. If we get to the point where current message index is equal to display messages.length minus 1, then we're at the point where we're deciding whether or not to send the text message to the pizza restaurant to place the order. In which case, if we decide that we do want to do that, we'll call send message. Otherwise, we'll reset the order and allow the user to continue from scratch. And finally, if in fact we're in the middle of the order process, the logic in this else clause is going to help us build up the order string containing the words pepperoni or mushroom depending on what the user is ordering, and eventually get to the point of calling utterance completed directly. Remember, this method also gets called by our onUtterance completed listener, but we're calling it directly here in order to move to the next message to allow the user to continue with the order.